Welcome everyone to another Book Versus. Back again to see if the book actually is always in fact better than the movie. So this week we had another request, this time to look at the beloved children's classic Peter Pan, written by good old j.m.barrie back in the day. Little fun fact for those who don't know, this actually started as a stage play, and then was later adapted into a book, and then obviously tons of movies and all the rest like today. So everybody already knows the story, no need to go over that, so getting right into it, according to the internet, which one's the best movie? Well, that then would be the 1953 Disney cartoon classic. I remember watching this plenty of times growing up, and while certain aspects of it haven't aged very well, apparently, according to the internet, it's still considered to be the best. Now, as I mentioned, the animated movie has aged. Certain stereotypes and whatnot no longer fly in today's culture. So then that must mean if there's a more modernized version of Peter Pan, it must be better, right? Oh, would you look at that? 70 years later, Disney made another live-action Peter Pan movie called Peter Pan and Wendy. So considering that Disney, as a company, now had an extra 7 decades of experience in storytelling and filmmaking and all that, that must mean that it's clearly better than the original cartoon, right? So just as a heads up, when I first started doing this book versus, knowing I was going to be doing Peter Pan, I actually wanted to do the 53 cartoon versus Hook, you know, the Robin Williams movie. However, after Nobody and I discussed it for a while, we came to the conclusion that Hook was too far removed from the original book. It's kind of like off doing its own thing, so that's why we ended up going with the 2023 live action movie instead. I just wanted to let you know that in case anybody actually was curious. So in the beginning, the original book establishes the Darlings family and their wacky hijinks. The cartoon does it fairly similarly when compared to the book. The live action, only half and half. So the men in the Darling family are very close to how they were in the original book. The women though, Wendy and her mother, they've been, well, dare I say, modernized some in the live action movie. For instance, the idea that Wendy, who at this point, as far as I can tell, will be around 12 or 13 in the book and in the Disney cartoon, would be that upset over the idea of having to get her own room away from her 2 younger brothers in the nursery. If I say I don't know too many girls, personally, around that age bracket who'd be too upset about getting their own room. That then being the case of live action, I feel correctly updated, as in she's still living with her brothers in the room, but although now she has curtains or drapes around her bed to give her some privacy. It makes a lot more sense to me. And then they made the interesting choice to have her being sent away to a boarding school, and she's taking that as a sign of her growing up, and she doesn't want to grow up. So then there's this scene in the live action where she's just kind of sitting there talking to her mother, expressing herself and talking about how she doesn't want to grow up, and she doesn't want to have her mother's kind of life and so on. Now, I feel this is a bit of a modern Disney trope now. You always seem to be having like the daughter and the mother are having a lot of tension between themselves in it. Is this all just another one for the pile in regards to that, or something different? I don't know. I'm just going to look at this as a one-off movie and ignore any other Disney projects for now. Anyway, so Peter Pan shows up, and all 3 follow the same formula. That's a good thing. I will say that the live action seems to imply that Peter Pan is taken as just being simply a story, and so that does take away a bit of the magic of it, since in the book and the cartoon it's more of like a tooth fairy kind of thing. So anyway, Peter Pan gets the case, they take off to Neverland, and this is where all 3 different mediums split apart from each other. In the book, the actual story is really all over and fragmented all over the place. So Peter takes them to the island, Neverland. He explains these are the main locales, and then they just have this crazy hodgepodge of this happened and that happened. At one point, the author, j.m.barrie, who jumps in multiple times through the story, says, oh, and they just had so many adventures, I couldn't possibly tell them all. So here's one at complete random that has no actual real effect on the actual story or narrative. This obviously wouldn't work that well for a film. I mean, who'd want to make a movie about some person or persons just randomly wandering through some area with, no cohesive overarching storyline or anything, and it's just kind of like pure randomness of this. Thankfully, both movies fixed this problem, right? But which one is actually closer to the book, more book accurate? That is a bit more muddy. However, I would argue that the cartoon did a better job of building Neverland as a place. You got to see many more locales, you got to meet many more different types of people, and when compared to the live action movie, which seemed to concentrate very heavily and almost exclusively on just the pirates. Of course, it's due to this that many people very correctly point out about how aged the cartoon movie has become. I mean, one only has to see when Peter pulls out that map to get that little uh-oh kind of thought in their mind, or when they're in that native tribe itself and they sing that song, Why is the Red Man Red? These are obviously just simply not acceptable these days, and meanwhile, nobody who has a bit of indigenous blood in her, I'll just suffice to say, wasn't too impressed by the scenes. Now, for the purpose of this book versus, I'm going to kind of overlook this aspect of the cartoon movie for now, alright? I'm just going to look at it from a very superficial standpoint. And looking at it from a superficial way, it does do a good job on making Neverland seem alive. Even with the book, even though it's all over the place, it does give you the sense that something's always happening somewhere, something's always going on, there's always go happening. The live action, I felt, didn't really do this, since they concentrate so much on just the pirates. And even more specifically, Captain Hook himself. I mean, okay, so they still went to Skull Rock, but aside from Skull Rock, they had the pirate ship, they had Peter's house, which isn't even in the tree anymore, now it's like in this cliff face dealy going on. And that's kind of all the locales they visited, aside from if you count the bluffs and the Darling's house. This overall made Neverland to me seem very small and uneventful. The mermaids were reduced to nothing more than a few seconds in the montage as they were initially flying over Neverland. The native tribe was nothing more than a single pan over in one shot. Even the crocodiles only in a single scene in the entire movie. The live action leaned very heavily in regards to Peter and Captain Hook's struggles, and then Wendy dealing and working through her emotions. And that was it, really. In the book, and to extension, the cartoon for the most part, Captain Hook hates Peter Pan because of, well, obviously he took his hand and fed to the crocodile, but also because of what Peter represents, youthful innocence and freedom and adventure and all the rest of that. This eventually created like an obsession with Captain Hook, which then eventually led to his destruction. I almost would go as far as to say that it's essentially like a Moby Dick analog, Captain Ahab going after his white whale and all that. Because since at any point in time, as they implied in the movie, the cartoon and the book, they could just simply weigh anchor and leave Neverland. Captain Hook had all the resources needed to live like a happy, fulfilling life elsewhere, but no, he's just so obsessed with the idea of getting Peter Pan and exacting his revenge and all the rest of it that he just never did. The live action would change this too, and well, spoilers. Okay, there's your spoilers. So in the live action movie, Captain Hook was originally one of the Lost Boys and the best friends with Peter Pan. And then depending on who you listen to, he said, she said, there's different reasons why it is that they want to kill each other, basically. Now, I have read fan theories back in the day that said that all the pirates are actually previously Lost Boys, but mind you, this is just fan theories and speculation. As far as I know, Mr. Barrie never confirmed anything like this. Now, mind you, this did give Hook a more concrete reason why he didn't like Peter Pan, but I do find myself concerned about whether or not this was the right decision to make in the story. I'll get more into that in a second here, but I need to finish up with the content quickly. Oh, yeah, one more thing I want to mention about the live action. This thing has been accused of, DEI and all that. The Lost Boys having girls and all the rest of it. Discussing about that goes beyond the scope of this channel. I'm not going to get into that. So in the same way as how I'm ignoring aspects from the cartoon movie, I want to ignore this aspect of the live action, and once again, just take it at face value. However, I'd like to think that we can all agree on that between outdated and damaging racial stereotypes versus needlessly shoehorning in genders and all the rest for virtue signaling points, that the latter will definitely be the lesser evil of the two. But anyway, let's just move on. So the world in general in the live action one does seem smaller when compared to the book and the cartoon, right? And it concentrates very heavily on very specific characters. So if you only care about those certain characters and you're golden, that's great. But if you want to feel more broad and open story, not so much. Finally, jumping ahead to the endings. Alright, so in the book, Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, they slaughter all the pirates aside from Shmi and Starkly, who managed to survive and get back to Neverland. In the cartoon, it's heavily implied then that the pirates, their ship is sunk and they're defeated and they're just going off in the ocean never to be seen again. Meanwhile, the live action one, it seems to be implied then that all the pirates aside from Hook and Smee drown. It's just the two of them. Once again, I find myself questioning this as you see Hook look up and smile and sees Peter Pan coming back on, the flying pirate ship. To me, that kind of says like, nothing changes. Like, oh, okay, well, I guess things really never do change in Neverland then, because that's what's happening right now. Which, in turn, as far as I'm concerned, goes against the idea of the book, which is saying growing up isn't necessarily a bad thing, because now it's saying things never change, and so that way you can stay young forever. But I will say the live action was more book accurate with the actual ending when compared to the cartoon, because in the book, the Darling family, alright, so Wendy, Michael, John bring back all the Lost Boys in the book with them back home to London, and the Darling family adopt them, and the Lost Boys all grow up in the regular adults, and it shows that this is what happens in the live action, so props to that. But as one final note, both movies seem to ignore the idea that the time passes while they're in Neverland. It seems to suggest that it's only like a single night or whatever. Like the parents left to go on their party, they came back, and oh, there you go, the kids are back. In the book, it seems to be like months have passed, maybe potentially years. It's kind of vague, but I would say at least months have passed, and so that gave them a lot more weight when the kids actually did return home. The movies also seem to ignore the fact about how in the book, Wendy went back to Neverland a couple more times, and then her daughter started to go, and then her daughter started to go. It does kind of imply this, seeing the parents kind of recognize, hey, wait, that's Peter's ship, so I'm probably just overthinking it a little bit, but at least throw a bone about Wendy or something. Alright, there are a lot of characters in this, so I apologize for going to be bundling some of them up together and trying to keep it short, because this book versus is already running long. So Peter's an arrogant jerk. I actually didn't like him. He's so full of himself and scatterbrained, concentrating only on what he wanted to do with little regard to those around him. He would save them if needed, yeah, but day-to-day, well, suffice to say, I wouldn't want him as a roommate. Cartoon Peter was closer to the book, I'd argue, than live-action Peter. He was still a braggart and childlike innocent, not taking things seriously, and most importantly, never hesitating to speak highly of himself. Live-action Peter retained some aspects of the book, wanting to not change, wanting to have adventures all the time. But to me, it seemed like he broke character multiple times in the film, the most glaring of which was at the climax with him and Hook. Adding an extra layer between them being old friends, I'd argue hurt his character in the long run, forcing Peter to face his actions, which the bright-eyed, aggravatingly innocent, and unaware book Peter probably wouldn't care about at all. Wendy. Wendy is, but not quite, a damsel in distress, but full-time stand-in mother figure in the book, taking the role of said mother, cooking and cleaning and instilling lessons into the Lost Boys and her younger brothers. She does stand up for them, but not to a large extent when faced with the pirates. Cartoon Wendy is very similar to the book in this regard. I haven't too much to say about her. Live-action Wendy now is a bit of a different beast. She seems to have even more screen time than Peter does now that large swaths of the story being based on her. She was more headstrong. Also, while some may say she's being a girl boss or whatever in the big fight at the end, like I mentioned earlier in the book, the kids killed all the pirates, so instead of having her stand around picking her nose, you may as well have her fight too. I liked how she had her vision of her growing up and having an exciting life. But one thing I'll mention is, since they're now girl Lost Boys, the aspect of her being the mother character is weakened, since when there were only boys, she was more unique. Now, she's just another girl. John and Michael, they were basically side characters in the book. The cartoon expanded them a bit, and then the live action a bit more beyond that. I will very hesitantly say the live action versions were my favorite. The Lost Boys. In the book, they were a ragtag group of rascallions with Peter. They each had their own names and some simple personalities. In the cartoon, they did a good job of giving that same vibe, working directly under Peter and taking his orders. Live action Lost Boys just sort of seemed to exist. They had some important lines, yes, but they seemed to just sort of get lost in the shuffle. Tiger Lily. She was mainly a plot device in the book. Had a couple moments, but that was it. In the cartoon, she was much the same. The live action, they tried to expand her, make her stronger, which is fine, sure, but they made her feel like she's invisible somehow. I can't explain it. She has multiple important parts in the movie, yet she somehow seems to not be there at the same time. My best guess is with the greater weight given Wendy's role, there wasn't enough room for a second, stronger female role, but she seemed important, but not needed at the same time. Me. Book Shmi came and went as one of the two parts that survived in the end, like I said. He was fun. Cartoon Shmi is a bona fide classic character. Everybody likes him as far as I know, and he's always entertaining to watch. Live action Shmi. I could see where they were going with him. I liked it, but they didn't do enough, which made me feel let down overall. Hook. I could go on for a long time about Hook, but I'll keep it as short as I can. Book Hook is a whimsy character with obsessive qualities that's willing to do what he needs to do to get Peter. And at the end, when he knew Peter was about to kill him, he took it in stride and made the best of it. Obsessive, interesting, proud. Cartoon Hook was kind of like that, but more waka waka like. I'm assuming so that they could play off Shmi more. Him potentially surviving, but clearly having lost his ship and being sent away was somewhat of an alright ending. I'm assuming it being a kids' movie, they didn't want Peter, for obvious reasons, to run him through. He's loud and bellows orders, like in the book, but he commanded respect and got it from his crew. Live action Hook. He does maintain his whimsy nature, but he comes off as more broody almost, and I'm still torn about the added aspect of him being Peter's old friend. But, ironically, like I already mentioned, the ending where he survives and smiles, apparently saying, "and nothing is going to change," bugged me a little. The whole kid leaving and coming back as an adult thing could be a good idea for a story based on Peter Pan. Using Hook, though, maybe, but it would take some more time, I feel, than the movie allowed to build a proper emotional connection with him, and by extension, Shmi. If only a movie took the idea and changed it so that the content would work in Tinkerbell. Wow, okay, so Tinkerbell. In the book, she's interesting, hates people, sorta, likes attending orgies, is borderline force touch / gawked at by Peter and the Lost Boys, to put it politely, is loud with sass and the like. Quite the character. Cartoon Tinkerbell is the same, toned down a bit, but still a piece of eye candy, and despite not actually talking or speaking, through the animation still clearly edgy and filled with the book Tinkerbell's temper, and once again, dripping with sass. Live action Tinkerbell is reeled way in. It's probably for the best that they toned down the suggestiveness of the character, okay, sure, but they took away her personality, essentially. She's basically just a space filler now, sort of flying around and sprinkling dust here and there. Even her big moment she saves Wendy at the end seems tame, because her character feels so bland when compared to other interpretations of her. Finally, the pirates. In the book, they were full crew, named, had positions, personalities, limited development, but it was there. The cartoon had the bare minimum needed to carry them, but looking at the live action, this was, in my opinion, the strongest point against the cartoon. They now have a full, diverse, and interesting crew that properly treaded the line between kid whimsy and threatening pirate. Good job. Book was all over the place with multiple storylines and time jumps. Certain plot points that just end abruptly without warning. Book seemed to move fast, but I felt it was an artificial speed just because of how much little blips and short story-ish things were kind of going on during it. Meanwhile, the cartoon had a very definitive beginning, middle, and ending, which was nice. Meanwhile, the live action concentrating so much on Hook and the pirates, it oddly made it seem and feel short when compared to the cartoon, even though it's 30 minutes longer than the cartoon was. The book was simple and whimsy, but by today's standard had dark swings about murder and vengeance and the like. Peter was not a nice guy in it, or at least by the way how I read and interpreted the book, he was not a nice guy. The cartoon still had the whimsy, and obviously they toned down the murdering aspect of it, but as far as I could tell, once again, Peter still had that kind of cruel edge to him based on how he kind of talked to and treated Tinkerbell and the Lost Boys and the rest.
A wonderful nurse, although Father says...
Girls talk too much.
Yes, girls talk too...
Meanwhile, the live action, yes, it did have points of whimsy, but it was generally geared towards Captain Hook and the pirates specifically. The Lost Boys, Tiger Lily, and the rest of them kind of like lost it somehow. I have some theories about why this is, but once again, this is already running long, so I'm going to skip ahead, but just to let you know I am aware of it. In the end, I take Peter Pan to be a book about, well, obviously freedom, but also about how growing up isn't necessarily a bad thing, and you can enjoy your childhood, enjoy your adventures, but eventually you're going to have to grow up and get adulting. The book, and arguably by extension the cartoon, did this by showing Wendy take on the role of mother and trying to raise and instill the lessons in the other kids. The live action had this, yes, but more so about the idea of Hook missing his mother and the frustrations about it, and then trying to take that out on Peter Pan. I kept waiting for them to talk about how Hook just simply becoming an adult didn't make him evil, and they never really seemed to approach it that much, at least that I didn't notice in any way. And then that whole line about him saying he doesn't have any happy memories as he plummets to his alleged doom didn't help matters. Cartoon had the growing up aspect fine. When they got home to their parents, and the Darlings, their mother and father looked up at Peter and like, hey, that's Peter's ship up there, and I remember that. It's showing that, hey, they were kids, they had their fun, they're now adults, and they're doing just fine. And that's probably why Wendy didn't have any problems with, going back to Neverland and have your kids go to Neverland. Imagine if they had made a movie where Wendy was going to Neverland, but then she just got too old one day and Peter tried to come bring her back. Alright, fine. Which of the three is the best one, alright? The original book, the children's classic cartoon, or the modernized live action version? This one was actually kind of difficult for me to choose because all three of them had definitive issues that I didn't like about them. But I slept on it and I thought about it actually for a few days, and I eventually just came to the conclusion that the best ones of the three has to be the 1953 cartoon! As a heads up, the cartoon most definitely won with a whimper and not a bang. It has glaring issues with it. Problem is, the book is too fragmented, and the live action spent too much time on the pirates and ignored Neverland itself too much. The book aged poorly in its own way, with Peter randomly murdering people and fairy orgies, while the live action tried to expand characters but somehow managed to make them feel weaker. I'm not saying the 2023 movie is bad per se, though I will argue the book is rough. But if you're going to try to lose yourself in the world of Neverland, the classic cartoon's the way to go. Thanks for watching. Nips had to knock twice before I got an answer, though.
Okay, hold up. I usually do this stuff in post, but this needs so much more attention that I could not stay silently by filling lines on a screen that never get read. This is huge. First, buddy, do us all a favor. Do not write a book. You are the definition of telling and not showing. I don't even know where to start. Peter. He grew as a person in the live action. The story and cartoon, to their own accord, both showed him as one-dimensional and self-serving, with little regard for the lives around him, beyond how they could serve him in his own pursuit of adventure and happiness. In the live action, he showed a much more human, multifaceted approach that included remorse, growth, love, understanding, and true friendship, the kind that puts others first from time to time. He recognized his wrongs and shed light into his own realization that he had long passed the point of being able to return to his life from before Neverland. Wendy, and to a lesser extent her mother, in the live action, she was allowed to show a future that was not simply rearing children and raising a home. Her mother was allowed to express remorse for her own life and how it had gone, touching base on many an issue that is often overlooked in oral narrative. Wendy, allowed to stand strong, fight, and even be her own person. She's able to share in the screen time, half and half, eked out still to a degree by Peter, and show herself as having more understanding of a purpose of growing up than simply becoming a baby-making mother. My goodness, kids come in more than just boys? However will we recover? How will they still miss their mothers? It's almost like girls need mothers too. If that's not a shock to you, good job, as it seems to have been a point missed by our dear buddy. How are you not upset that no one misses their fathers? Hook. This one, to be fair, is a bit of an interesting enigma to me. I actually didn't mind the original Hook. He was a fun villain. However, this version, in the live action, once Peter's friend turned wronged villain who grew up missing the one thing he longed for, to return to his mother, and the only thing that he had valued since, his best friend Peter, displayed perfectly, in spite of Buddy's inability to see it, that aging alone did not bring him to a state of evil baddie, but rather the circumstances of that aging. No mother, no real friends, and raised by a band of unscrupulous pirates who, while showing respect and following his leadership, still very much are pirates. A group who base their entire beings off stealing, sailing, and murder. Kinda hard not to be a bad adult in that environment. A lesson in the value of not growing up wrong. Almost like that was a line in the movie or something. All in all, while I can understand Buddy and his incessant clinging to books and their originating stories, I have to take a pause and wonder. If the book is written poorly, or at the very least, would be poorly regarded as a literary work if it were to newly release to this day and age, is diverting from it truly such a bad idea? Or does keeping the essence of the story, that message, that a desire to retain the childhood innocence and playtime at all costs is not in fact superior to the adventure of growing up, make the story in itself still wondrous?